I wanted to tell a story. And those of you who know me, I love stories about social entrepreneurs. And this was a 39-year-old man. He happened to be a minister in a church in Boston in 1902, and he started a project. And there were lots of people doing churchy things around refugees at the time, but it was all based on philanthropy and on charity. So they were sort of getting money and then giving it to refugees and giving things to, and there was this sort of idea of giving, and that's great, and it's very Christian, and I'm a Christian and I'm fine with that. But what I love about what Dr. Helms did is he said, we're going to collect goods, we're going to upcycle, recycle and repair them, and we're going to pay refugees to do that by selling the goods. 120 years later, Goodwill Industries turnover $5.67 billion. More than 20 million people have got work through that organisation, and they still do the same thing. They still sell stuff and pay people and provide training from their money. And before people go, oh, I mean, it's such a big organisation, people have lots of opinions, and in the US, they're thrift stores, which are charity shops here, but they're not really the same. It's like the scale is different. They have bad press, everyone does. But I think what's important for me is when I look at them, the organisation has maintained the same mission. They're still helping people into work. And 96% of their revenue is traded. So 75% is directly from retail sales. And those of us who are in the retail space, whether it's e-commerce, retail or direct retail, know how hard that is. They've survived 120 years of retail. And then they've got another 21% that comes through contracts. Slightly easier in the US because the government gives you restricted contracts if you have more than 75% of the workforce in certain categories. But what Goodwill do, which I love as a social enterprise, is they say, we're going to provide employment for everyone. And if we happen to have enough people to tip the balance in this little category to get that contract, we'll get the money there. Then we'll use our trading income to give the other people jobs. And they do that shifting around that social entrepreneurs are so good at. 4% of their turnover globally is donations and grants. And so I think that's phenomenal. And when we're looking as social entrepreneurs about the change we want to make, and I know everyone in the last panel of the day around the activist, innovator, anarchist. And Belinda and I don't really joke when we say anarchy is the plan B, because there's a lot of frustration I find with social entrepreneurs that we've been doing this for a long time. But if we look at someone who did something 120 years ago and it's still making a difference in people's lives, employing people, I think that's phenomenal. And so I got to learn about this through my Churchill Fellowship, and that happened to be just a crazy connection. So many of the people here, there's little connections that I've been going, I met you here and I met you there, and this person introduced me to you. I got my Churchill Fellowship to go to the States, and it was 2017, and I'd been told I could go, and I wanted to do scale, and I wanted to do a social enterprise in the US, because I thought, we're a little arrogant here in the UK about social enterprise. We kind of go, well, we invented it and we do it this way. And I'm like, the US does things very differently, and it's huge. And I'd never been there, so I didn't realize quite how huge it was. I did 8 states on Megabus and Amtrak. I was 28 hours on Amtrak from New Orleans to Washington, DC. So I really got the sense of scale. But I was looking for a big social enterprise that did jobs, because I'm always interested in jobs. I think that changes people's lives. And I was sitting at the Judge Business School because I was in the team there, and there was this American sitting next to me. And I was like, oh, well, you're in the Centre for Social Innovation, and you're obviously interested in social enterprise, and you're American. So you must have the answer to my question, which is, I want a large social enterprise that does jobs. He went, my grandfather set up this one. And he didn't assume I knew what Goodwill was, because I didn't. And he just said, you know, that's what they do. And so I got to hijack a leadership conference with the Goodwill executives and interview tons of their chief executives and just learn from them. Because I think if we're trying to create change, we're not interested in 5 years of change. You know, 50% of SMEs don't reach their 5th birthday. We don't want to just reach our 5th birthday by being financially sustainable. We want to go way past that. And we do want to create 100 years of change. We do want to make a difference. And how could we learn from what Goodwill did? So I've got 6 points on how we can learn. They are in my Churchill report. but there's lots of other things in there too. And I haven't promoted it, it's not long, but it's not that exciting. The first one is start with the founder's vision. And I always like to say, be really clear what you're trying to achieve. You can't do everything. And often it's about saying what you don't do and what you do, and being incredibly clear with that and communicating that really clearly and consistently. And whether it's a founding team like Amy and Ruth and Jack, or whether it's a single social entrepreneur, it's finding that clarity. And then the second part is, I would always say, start with trade. You just get money in the door, and there's loads of reasons for that. It's proof of concept. It's money you can do what you like with. It's not grant dependent, and it gives you a sense of sustainability the minute you start getting people paying you for what you're doing. And then the third one is communication. And we all are very good at communicating externally, saying, this is my mission, and I'm going to pitch to you, and I'm going to get investors, I'm going to get stakeholders, I'm going to get people engaging with me. But actually, we forget about internal communication. And so many of the social entrepreneurs I work with kind of assume that we all share the same value. Well, we do, but what that means is not always the same thing. So one entrepreneur I've got says kindness is one of her values. I mean, that's lovely, but do your staff actually know what you mean by being kind? And so what she means about being kind is using particular words and not using other words in communication as a social enterprise lettings agency. Because she feels being kind is being clear and being truthful. And so not saying, unfortunately, we were unable to offer you this delightful property. It's going, sorry, we don't think it was the right property for you. Can we have a conversation about it? Because we think this property might suit you. And so it was just cutting the crap, but also for her, that's being kind. And so I constantly say to Susan, you don't have a glass skull. I don't know what you imagine when you use that word. So internal communication is something we always forget about. And it's one of the things that I noticed Dr. Helms did really, really well. And it probably was because he happened to be a newspaper journalist before he became a church minister. Both of those careers at the turn of the century before last required a lot of writing and communicating. So he wrote everything down. So he wrote down his mission to communicate externally, and then he wrote down his mission constantly to tell people what to do internally to make sure that they did what he wanted, which is why, no surprise, they're still doing what he wants 120 years later. So he thought about this internal, external communication. And then deep community engagement. What social enterprise does differently, I think, is, yeah, we do compete because we have to. Most of the time, we're deeply connected with the people we work with and the communities around us. And I saw that loads when I was working up in Scotland, but also just every social enterprise I know goes, oh, and this person helps me, and this person helps me, and can I do this, and can I do that? That's what we do. It was embedded in the DNA of Goodwill because I read a 1930s manual on how to run a Goodwill shop. It included how to work with the community. It also included how to lay out the shop. It also included how to measure your impact. And because he wrote all of that down, we now have impact reports going back that far so that the other people in Goodwill now can go, oh yeah, and we'll add to it and we'll keep growing. So deep community engagement, thinking about it and embedding it. I think the other aspect that we don't think about with community engagement is it makes a successful organisation. So when you've got 5 generations of leaders in an organisation and you get access to them on the bus going out to see Jamestown or Yorktown or something, I get to ask questions like, and what if they fail? Because nobody talks about that. And it's a big enough organisation that if one part of the network fails, everybody grabs pieces and holds it and saves people. It's just always doing that over the century. We identified, me chatting to some of my new pals, was its lack of community engagement causes the failure, combined with governance. So I'm not going to let you get away without governance. I have to talk about governance. That's my thing. And I'm going to do the governance dance. I'm warning you now. We're going to do that. Kirsty's petrified. She just looked at me. It was like the governance. When you are deeply committed to your community and you get the right people on your board, and the board is part of the community, and actually I was reflecting this with Shay, who's coming just later for her book launch, with Kimberly with Black Girls Code in the US, that organization went down as she reflected that she was told to get people on her board based on being the great and the good, not her community. And she felt that the step change in her organization from being just an activist thing to being an organization was to get the right people on her board. And she lost her community engagement. And it kind of hasn't worked out so well. We'll see what happens next. Every time Goodwill didn't get community engagement in their boards, they got the wrong CEO, who didn't work with the team collaboratively, who didn't work with the community collaboratively, and that was the beginning of the end. So in 156 organizations, they went down, and we're talking about a minimum of $11 million turnover in these organizations. And so their boards were not insignificant, but it contributed. The minute those boards were not engaged, not community orientated, not behind the mission, the organization failed. And we don't see that when we look at an organization for 5 years or even 2 years. We see that when we look at an organization for 50, 100, 120. And the final point I have was focus on process. And so I got to do 4 podcasts around legacy and embedding your legacy with Christine Michaelis, who a little shout out for the online session. She's written 16 books, and she's doing a How to Write a Business book in the online festival. She's amazing. She's just after your session on collective thinking on your boards. So we're back to boards, and governance is part of process, and it's about doing the boring things every single day and actually doing those boring business things again and again, which writing a manual on how you lay out a shop is a boring thing. And the fact that it's done year on year, and you know about writing manuals on laying out shops, Amy. It's just this continuous one. So those are the 6 points that I think we need to think of if we're thinking about legacy just in our little organization, however big your little organization is. We'd all love to have $5.7 billion to change the world, but I think every one of us has different definitions of impact. But think about being really clear on your mission. Think about trade, what money you're pursuing and how to get good income in through the door. Think about internal communications. Think about your processes. Think about community engagement.